Join me as I talk about important considerations in creating places for young children to learn and engage in play and creative activities. Before you make decisions about setting up the physical learning environment, it's essential that you consider the characteristics of the children who will be learning in that classroom. Developmentally appropriate practices include three key aspects. The first is understanding principles of child growth and development that is typically expected for the specific ages of children in your program. The second is attention to the unique individual differences. We start with knowledge of age-appropriate expectations, yet knowing that we will need to use accommodations and modifications to meet individual needs. The third major aspect is acknowledging and being responsive to cultural differences or the cultural context of the children in his or her family, neighborhood, and community, as well as supporting connections to culturally diverse backgrounds, including race, ethnicity, religion, family structures, and values that families hold dear. The linkage between age and individual appropriateness and cultural context is a central focus on intentionality. This means that decisions about learning environments, context, or teaching strategies are made purposefully and intentionally and include reflection about best practices that these aspects take into account. Another important area that requires attention when planning the learning environment is the purpose or focus of the program. Are you serving children in full day, extended day, or half day programs? Are there distinct age groups like 3s and 4s that are in separate classrooms? Or does the program have blended groups of learners in a multi-age setting? Of course, particular curriculum models emphasize different ways of setting up the physical environment and how materials are selected, displayed, and used. And this may influence scheduling and the view of the teacher's role in supporting children's learning. Faith-based programs take into account spiritual development in a way that is consistent with the values and doctrine of that church. Public school programs may focus on character development in different ways, but moral teaching and social skills may be more the secular approach. Finally, the purpose of the program will have an impact on setting up the physical environment, especially through the selection of materials and decisions about accessibility to the children. Schedules tied to curriculum models that separate content areas or that may tie themes or projects together holistically, and that requires longer blocks of time. School-based programs may provide special programming like music, technology, or library time, even for preschool programs, and that will affect the organization of the daily and weekly schedules. Many decisions must be made about what to include in the physical environment, ranging from organizing interest areas, group areas, and activity tables, to designing display spaces and making aesthetic choices. Programs like Reggio Emilia focus on natural materials and calming home away from home materials and furnishings. Programs like Montessori have specific sets of materials and space organized within certain parameters. Whatever the foundation for curriculum decisions, the learning environment should link beliefs to practices and desired outcomes. Early childhood programs usually include many types of learning centers or interest areas that allow children to explore diverse materials and that support active engagement. It's important to make sure to balance opportunities across the curriculum areas and be intentional in those decisions. I like to use a double continuum to evaluate the type of learning experiences that I provide in my programs and help process where areas should be placed in the classroom. The two continuums combine and create quadrants that can be used to think about balance and the provision of diverse learning activities. Think for a moment about what types of interest areas would be placed in each quadrant. What experiences are wet and quiet, wet and noisy, with wet really referring to messy, not just water-based activities. What about activity areas that provide dry, quiet activities and those that are dry and noisy? You can see some examples. Watercolor is wet but quiet due to children being seated and working with fine motor manipulation of the brushes. Blocks are obviously noisy and dry. The reading corner is quiet and dry, and sensory tables with water, sand, or foam pieces are noisy and messy or wet. When you evaluate your learning environment, check for balance. Check for the diverse learning experiences. If you have no or few activity areas in a particular quadrant, you might have to think outside of the box and move beyond your comfort zone to bring in more messy, noisy activities, or build in some quiet, solo, safe spaces for individual children. To allow children to work without always being disrupted or distracted, think intentionally about center placement, taking into account the wet, dry, and noisy, quiet features. Analyze walkways and traffic areas. Does the arrangement help or hinder transitions? Are the centers in close proximity compatible with one another, such as having the book corner next to sensory play? Doesn't make sense. So think about the arrangements of what goes together well in the classroom. Accessible materials communicate to children that they can and are expected to make choices that allow them to execute their ideas and make creations that evolve and expand over time. Make sure to set up organizational features like picture word labeling and easy storage and access. You should also provide individual spaces, especially in full day programs, where children can choose to be alone and can choose creations they have made and photographs and projects like blocks or construction materials to put on a pride wall where they each have their own individual space. The learning environment you create communicates beliefs about learners and desired outcomes. Make certain that your physical space and the materials selected actually match what you believe. Your environmental analysis project in this module will help you learn the process of reflection so you can examine how the physical environment reflects your own beliefs. To summarize some important tips, organization includes the physical setting, the messages about accessibility, and options for choices. You can build in flexible uses of materials and seek to balance a variety of activities. Traffic flow should create an environment where children's play is not unintentionally interrupted, and spaces for large groups, small groups, and individual spaces will support many types of play and interactions with others, as well as respect for individual downtime. Let's talk a little about learning centers. Centers are defined as areas in the room that focus on specific skills, like a math center focusing on number sense, one-to-one correspondence, and number recognition, or on special topics like a science center on plants or on simple machines. All types of learning centers can be linked to literacy with books and have writing materials available. Teachers manage centers by intentionally selecting materials that are age appropriate, yet address a range of skills to allow for individually appropriate experiences. Despite the provision of learning materials, the teacher must be an active player in the learning process. Teachers step in and step out of scaffolding learners, provide descriptive language and input, and use questioning to help children process and solidify new concepts as they fit those into prior knowledge. Again, best practices for managing learning centers include opportunities for active learning, problem solving, hands-on, minds-on manipulation with materials, support for social interactions, and learning conflict resolution. Children learn to make planful and intentional choices and see the direct result of their risk-taking and active engagement. Teachers guide children to the use of centers by establishing guidelines for number of children, like with 4 hooks to hang name tags on in an area that would limit them to 4. Or they build on intentional planning, such as using planning boards or stating plans to teachers, like in the Hive Scope Plan, Do, Review sequence. Teachers must be actively engaged when children are in centers, observing, assessing, interacting, questioning, documenting, scaffolding, and assisting with the development of social skills, conflict resolution, and self-regulation. So given the establishment of an engaging physical space, establishing guidelines for use, and a wide range of learning materials, what else can teachers do to support play? Build spontaneous play, also known as free play or self-selection, into the schedule with sufficiently long blocks of time. Make centers available several times throughout the day. Choose materials that allow for a variety of uses that encourage creativity and flexibility. Support social interactions and model and scaffold positive, altruistic, helping behaviors. Even with quality materials, the children need time to engage, to plan, to collaborate, to strategize, and develop complex plans. Research shows that children engaged in 30 minutes in blocks of time versus 15-minute blocks of time show more play overall, more cooperative play, more complex play, and more sociodramatic play. The same children, when assessed in a 15-minute block, display less overall play, more unoccupied or onlooker behavior, less complex and constructive play, and more functional repetitive practice and solo dramatic play. It is amazing to see the difference that 15 minutes can make in allowing children to develop and carry out collaborative plans and think and engage in higher level thinking skills such as evaluating and creating. The remainder of the slides are for your reference from a wonderful book that is out of print. It's cited on the last slide. These slides provide the educational value of each type of center that Georgia Howell addressed in her writing, and this information can be so helpful to create descriptions of centers to share with families, to post the benefits at an open house, or to use for self-reflection all about the benefits that center-based, play-based experiences can offer to young children. Take a look through the educational values and download and save the presentation for future reference. On this slide, it looks at painting and sculpture and examines how it influences small muscle development, using art media, exploring color, design. It's a quiet activity and allows for social maturation. For collage and construction, obviously, this is a creative endeavor where fantasy, language, textile exploration, use of tools, socialization with others, and pride in work are outcomes of centers that involve collage and construction. Carpentry is a challenging area, and it causes the students to really look at perseverance, and it's an incentive to have a long-term project come to fruition. Also very strong for eye-hand coordination and fine motor and gross motor skills. Water and sand allow for tactile stimulation, which we're used to thinking about, but it can also be used for map making, where you make representations with roads, villages, transportation that are made in sand and water, especially with wet sand. The area of physical science involves using instruments, scientific processes, and note-taking. It allows communication with language and social interaction and sharing the findings, links math and science, and also builds a lot of self-esteem by having the children interact with science and complex processes. The Math Center obviously develops math vocabulary, using the instruments that are available to use, writing, even calculators and other sorts of technology. The self-pacing that can be involved in exploring concept is also a strong benefit. Blocks in transportation provide a lot of representation of the world around them, using small and large muscles, the social interaction, and even the pretend play that come out of creating a farm or a road and using families, creating houses. That strong commitment and achievement of creating a construction and possibly with another child is a strong educational value. Exploring living things is a wonderful opportunity to help the children learn about caring for living things, using informational resources to learn about animals, plants, habitats, ecology, and it can be also used in outdoor classroom spaces that might be established in programs. The Family Life Center, or what might be seen as the kitchen area, helps them explore the adult roles they see, involves creativity, testing the fantasy and reality, all the social interactions that happen, and it also relates well to social studies. Dramatic play is such a wonderful opportunity. It can be a range of things and a combination. If you have room for a kitchen center and can also set up a hospital that goes with it, a grocery store that they can take things home with. So the children assume roles, they act out reality, they test the different things they see, the expressive language, the later effect on vocabulary, and even early reading is evident in dramatic play. Music and listening centers are wonderful opportunities which sometimes are not developed well in classrooms. People are afraid of the noise, but having areas that they can explore instruments, can use different kinds of technology, music to produce, tone, pitch, rhythm. In a classroom that I worked in, we had a piano. I was the only adult who could play the piano, and it seemed like it was such a waste. So I color coded the keys and created little songs that they could play, like Mary Had a Little Lamb, using the color coding so that they could sit down and play themselves. The adults also enjoyed sitting down and playing the color coded songs. So there's a lot of ways to explore and have children be comfortable with listening to music, producing music. It's a great educational opportunity. Table games and activities can involve things like puzzles, but also blocks, connects, Legos, things like that, where they are doing creative, sitting one by one another, either parallel or possibly associative, and maybe even creating things together. Even though it says table activities, I found those kind of opportunities to be great to put on the floor where you've got large spaces, more collaboration. But table activities and games definitely are a benefit to the children. Language arts and writing, which oftentimes occur in two different centers, involve producing the written symbol, also being familiar with recognizing it, doing different kinds of opportunities with books and stenciling and copying, all ways of getting print on paper, even before children have the fine motor skills to do it independently. Composition, writing with dictation, like I said, stencils, words, word cards, rebus pictures, all kinds of opportunities can be used to enhance their language development skills. More things are emphasized here in terms of that written expression, sharing ideas, writing alone, part of a group, creating dictated stories as a small group, maybe even having words that you produce. Many times I would start a unit and do basically a what do you know kind of activity. So we would brainstorm words about fall, and I would label the words and oftentimes draw rebus pictures or find pieces that I could use to illustrate that, to give them words that could then go in the writing center and they could reproduce later. Library centers are such a wonderful opportunity. They can be quiet, relaxed. You can use headphones. It's great to have parents read the stories, especially in other languages with some of the books. So children who are English speaking can listen to other languages and look at the pictures and have the input, but also the children who are reflecting their home language can hear their parent reading in their home language and maintain and benefit that. It's wonderful if you have indoor large muscle spaces, gross motor spaces. That's not always available to us. So playgrounds kind of fill the gap. But if you have spaces, then you want to have those opportunities in the classroom. Sometimes I would set up little temporary things, footprints on the floor for them to jump and follow and cross over, balance beams that I could do either in a narrow format or it could fold over and be flat, and a wider stand so they could use in the classroom. So some temporary things you could also do, especially for rainy days. And if you have gym space, then that's a great way to use some of those materials, but I didn't always have that available space. One of the other important things with large muscle and also relaxation is a place to stretch, focus on breathing and body control, the whole area of mindfulness that is emerging into the field and used in early childhood in all grades all the way through high school. So those are a lot of the different educational values. Here's the resources listed. I think you may be able to find a used copy of one of the versions of Hal's books, but they're very difficult to find. And this way you have some of this information that I thought was extremely helpful.